Hey guys, how's it going? Happy Wednesday. We're going to be talking more about the Boston Tea Party today. And for those of you who didn't realize, the book Colonial Voices was basically an overview from Ethan's perspective of everything that happens on the day of the Boston Tea Party and basically all the events leading up to it. Okay? Now, our content framing question for today is, what is a deeper exploration of opinions reveal in Colonial Voices? And then our craft question, which we're going to touch on a little bit today, but more so tomorrow during our writing portion, is how do I write an opinion paragraph? Because we're going to be talking more about opinions, but before we get into opinions, you need to learn all the stuff that we're going to be going through today. Okay? So the first thing for today is the Boston Tea Party. Okay? The Boston Tea Party, if you did the reading and you saw at the end of Colonial Voices all of the colonists who were tired of the taxes and didn't want to have to pay the tea tax, stormed the British ships that were located in Boston Harbor, and they took all the boxes of tea, they opened them up, and they dumped the tea overboard, okay? And then, at one point in Colonial Voice, it talks about, I wonder how the tea will be with salt water. That's because Boston Harbor is along the East Coast, and it's part of the Atlantic Ocean, so it's salt water, okay? And I'm going to use this today as my little pointer because I don't have a pointer. It's at school, so listen up. Now, we're in Boston, and it's 1773. And we had three main perspectives as we read Colonial Voices, and those were Patriot, Loyalist, and in between. Now, Patriots, Loyalists, and people who were in between were not just found in Boston or in Massachusetts, they were found throughout the colonies, okay? And now there were several reasons why people were either a Patriot, a Loyalist, or an in-between, and that's what I'm going to be showing you right now, okay? So now, the Boston Tea Party was put on by one of these three groups, and when I'm done explaining to you, I'll reveal which group it was. But if you did the reading and you kind of see where everything was going, you learned about the Sons of Liberty, you should know which group started the Boston Tea Party. But now you have the Patriots. The Patriots believed that taxes were wrong and that they should not be paid. Okay, this goes back all the way to the sugar taxes, the stamp taxes, and now the tea taxes. They didn't want to pay any of them. The main thing that Patriots had going for them was that they wanted independence. And who did they want independence from? They wanted independence from England or Great Britain, however you want to say it. Okay, they wanted to become their own country. Now, they also felt that their rights and lives were being hurt by the British. So basically, people thought they couldn't live their best life under British rule. And then the last thing is that they did not need the British to help their businesses. Because at this time, and as you saw in Colonial Voices, there was a bunch of different monologues, a bunch of different perspectives, but those were all the jobs of the colonial times. The milliner, the tavern owner, the school head, the baker, the blacksmith, all of those people, those were the jobs of the time. And so some of those jobs relied on both colonist and English money to survive, but then some of them only needed Patriot money to survive, or they were providing a service that only people who lived in the colonies really needed, okay? Now, the Loyalists were obviously supporters of the British and of English rule and of King George and all that, and they believed that the taxes should be paid, okay? That was plain and simple. They didn't see a problem with the taxes, and they were like, I'm going to pay them. Part of that also, though, comes from the fact that a lot of the colonists that were living here had all originally come from Europe at some point. And many of them were, in fact, English. So they had no problem following the rules that they followed when they were back home. They were just like, hey, I'm from England. I'm now here in the colonies, but I'm still going to follow the same rules that the king has set out for me. The third part is that the colonies were owned by the British. So they were like, well, we're kind of owned by the British. We really don't have much say in this. And so being that they're basically our boss or in charge of us, we should probably just follow the rules. A lot of the Loyalists were kind of like the rule followers of the time. And the Patriots are more the ones who were like rebelling and going against and starting a revolutionary war. And then the last part of the Loyalists is that they were businesses that needed English money. So they needed not only the money from the Patriots and the Colonists who were living in Boston or in any of the other colonies, they also needed money from the British soldiers who were living here as well. And one person from Colonial Voices that jumps out right away was the milliner with all of her fancy fabrics and stuff like that to make dresses, because that was what the English were used to. And so they would go to her for all of their fashion needs. And then the last group is the in-betweens, okay? The in-betweens really are there. They're seeing both sides, but they don't really care that much. They're kind of in the middle. They kind of want to stay out of everything, okay? So the biggest group of in-betweeners was Native Americans or slaves of people who lived in the colonies, or of the British who lived in the colonies, okay? Then the other in-betweeners were people whose lives weren't really affected by the English being in the colonies. They were like, all right, you know, there's taxes, those taxes don't affect me, or they're making certain rules, those rules don't affect me, so whatever. And then the last thing is that there were many people that thought that the fighting, as with any war, would hurt too many people. And they didn't want to see all these people get hurt in some, you know, probably what they thought silly war, okay? Now, if we go back to Colonial Voices, the last sentence of Colonial Voices, I can put the bat down now, is what will happen now, okay? And it shows that page, and actually I'll pull it up for you. It shows the page where all the Patriots are rejoicing in the streets of Boston after they've just dumped all the tea. So there they are having the Boston Tea Party. And then the last page is there they are on the streets kind of celebrating, having a big old good time for themselves, okay? Well, the line, what will happen now, is actually answered in George versus George. And yes, we are going back to George versus George, but for good reason, because George versus George gives us more of that neutral, that like in-between perspective of the Revolutionary War as a whole. So as Colonial Voices, as interesting as that was, and as much as there's Patriots and Loyalists and in-betweens in there, it's more from a patriotic point of view, or patriotic perspective, because it basically details how they eventually got to throwing all the tea in Boston Harbor. But I do want to read 2 or 3 quick pages of George versus George, and one of which I read yesterday, but I do want to go over them again. Now, I want to take a closer look. One word we need to know today before we get into George versus George is the word traitor. Okay, now I'm sure some of you guys have heard the word traitor before, and just so you know, the exact definition is that it's a person who breaks their trust with his or her side and fights as an opposition. Okay, now that would be like me all of a sudden saying, you know, I'm for class 402, like we're gonna do all the greatest things in the world, and all of a sudden like I leave 402 and I join 403 or whatever class Miss Moreno is, and I'm like, oh, now I'm with Miss Moreno's class, like you guys, see you later, I'm gonna go against you guys, I'm gonna try to beat you guys now to be the best class. That would be me being a traitor, okay? And we're gonna learn more about traitors as we go along, but to start off today, George versus George, because the word traitor falls into, actually what's gonna be part of your homework. So, the Tempest over Tea. 1770 to 1774. And then there's King George, and King George is saying there must always be one tax to keep us right. As such, I approve the tea duty. Okay? So he wanted just to keep one tax on the colonists, just to make sure that they were always like, okay, they're in charge. Or he could say, I'm the boss because I gave you guys a tax. It just so happened that on the very same day as the violence in Boston, Parliament and King George over in London were trying to keep the peace. So the violence they're referring to is the Boston Massacre. They got rid of all important taxes except for one tiny tax on British tea. So at this point he realizes that he's kind of making a mistake. He gets rid of some of the taxes, but he keeps the tea tax. They thought they would solve the problem, but it didn't. Lots of colonists resented paying any British taxes, no matter how tiny the tax was. It was a matter of principle, meaning that they were just like, hey, this is our way, this is what we want to do, and we're not going to pay anything. Some refused to drink British tea and drank tea smuggled from Holland instead. Others, including George Washington, stopped drinking tea altogether, which is a big move at this time. By 1773, the British East India Company had so much unsold tea sitting around that it was about to go broke. So because of their boycotting or not using the tea, the company that made the tea was like, we don't have anyone to buy this and we're losing all of our money. To keep this tea company in business, Great Britain's Prime Minister, Lord North, proclaimed that absolutely nobody except the East India Company could sell tea in America. To convince colonists to buy the tea, prices were set so low that even with tea taxes, the company's tea cost less than teas sold in England or America. So they dropped the price, basically being like, please buy the tea. It's still taxed, but even with the tax, it's lower than it was. The colonists loved tea, but most of them still thought that this was taxation without representation. British tea either rotted in warehouses or got sent straight back to England. Before long, Royal Governor of Massachusetts Thomas Hutchinson declared that unless the tax was paid, none of the tea shipped to Boston Harbor could be sent away. So basically, that's why all the ships were sitting in the harbor with all the tea in them, because until that tea was used, the ships wouldn't leave. If the tea was not unloaded, ship commanders would force it on the shores and cover for their cannon's mouth. So basically, they're gonna saying that they're gonna shoot it onto the shore. Now we have this picture we kind of quickly looked at yesterday that I'll give you guys a closer look of once we read it, because I want to focus on the speech bubbles today. On the night of December 16th of 1773, some Sons of Liberty covered their faces and hands with coal dust, disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians, and very calmly filed on board 3 ships filled with tea. Hundreds gathered to watch the men split open 342 chests of British Darjeeling tea with tomahawks and fled all 45 tons of it to the fish. Most Britons were outraged when they heard the news of the wanton destruction. Americans were clearly a race of convicts that had gone too far and must be punished. 6 months later, the king and an angry parliament closed Boston Harbor. Nothing could come in and nothing could go out. So that's what answers the question of what will happen now, is that because the colonists got on board and threw all the tea overboard, it forced the king to close Boston Harbor. And what that means is that nothing could come in and nothing could go out. So the colonists needed goods from other countries, but then they also sent their goods to other countries. And that was how they traded and made money and got the things they needed to live their lives, okay? But if you look, it says, Boston Harbor is a teapot tonight. And on this side it says, tea is a beverage of traders, which comes back into that vocab word that we did before of traders. And it says, rally Mohawks, bring your axes and tell King George will pay no taxes on his foreign tea. So you're seeing a lot of pro-patriot perspective here. Boston Harbor's a teapot tonight, meaning they're like, yeah, all the tea's in the water. And then obviously the colonists who were dressed up as Native Americans were patriots. And then over here it says, tea is the beverage of traders. That's going to be part of the question you guys answer for homework tonight. You're going to be thinking of whose perspective does that represent? Is that a patriot point of view? Or is it a loyalist point of view? Okay? And then also for your classwork today, you have your question down here. Would you have been a patriot, loyalist, or an in-between? Explain. And that's why I left our craft question on here today, because this down here is your opinion. Do you think that you would have been a patriot, someone who would have participated even in the Boston Tea Party, or would you have been a loyalist who was, loyal to the king and wanted to follow all the rules, or were you going to be someone who's in between? Okay, you're going to pick which one of those 3 things you are, and you're going to explain, give me reasons, details, everything like that. I will post this chart for you if you need them, okay? So, this question is your classwork. You have another question for homework. And that's it until tomorrow. Bye, guys.